Thanks very much, Kathy Walden. It's really good to come in and speak to you formally at the end of your day. And I do want to echo what's already been said, which is to thank you for coming in and sharing your views, because it's definitely the case that the contribution that you're making is very important to us. And you know it's a busy time for government as a whole. We've got a lot on our plate, improving services for people with disabilities very high on this government's agenda. And I know my colleague Jan McLucas spoke to you this morning about the National Disability Strategy, a national 10-year policy framework there to drive reforms in 6 key areas. Learning and skills, importantly, one of those areas. And you've also heard, as Kathy's just reprised, about the National Disability Insurance Scheme, which the Prime Minister's been taking a leading role in driving forward. I think it's very important to say that the details of how a future disability insurance scheme and its interaction with schooling are still yet to be determined, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done now. One clear principle that underpins this model is that it's applicable to all areas of government endeavour. And that is really a way of saying that keeping the individual at the centre of what we do, not the system, not the operational requirements of a particular program, but the individual and their needs is absolutely crucial. So, of course, I wanted to speak a little in that context about school education. We do know that government and non-government providers are investing a significant amount in providing support for students with disabilities in schools, and you will have seen the release last week of the Australian Council for Educational Research, a report commissioned by the Gonski panel that's looking into funding of schools and education generally, an estimate of around $2.8 billion in terms of an investment, and that's probably understated. I think it's true that there's no lack of effort or goodwill on the part of schools and school systems working with children with disabilities, and yet, despite those efforts, we know, and certainly you know, that there are big gaps and inconsistencies in service provision. We have different approaches to funding and definitions across the country, and of course they're creating some surprising but I think troubling anomalies. I mean, one of the examples that I was particularly taken by and we referred to when Mr. Gonski and I actually released the reports that the panel had commissioned, using the current range of definitions, finding that in one state 3% of students are eligible for additional support by meeting a criteria of disability. In another, the figure is over 10%. In one jurisdiction which has a relatively inclusive definition of disability, average funding made available for a student with a disability just over $4,000. In another jurisdiction where fewer students meet the definition, the average spend per student is over $40,000. And we have a system where a child can receive a diagnosis in one state and be eligible for support, yet move to another state, require a new diagnosis, and for the same condition, receive a different level or type of support, or even no support at all. I know this situation is very frustrating for families, to say the least, and at its worst it can also be disruptive and unsettling for the child. The government is leading work with our state and territory colleagues, as you know, on a national definition of disability. This has been tried before, it has to be said. I'm relatively confident and maybe even measuredly optimistic that we are going to get there this time. I'm certainly very determined that the Commonwealth plays a constructive leadership role, and I also welcome the contribution and the cooperative approach that other jurisdictions have taken so far in this very important piece of work. I mean, the fact is that a national definition will enable us to properly understand the level and distribution of need across the country, to monitor successful approaches that could be expanded elsewhere, and most importantly, to plan for future provision. And of course, as well as that, depending on timing, I think it will be an important piece of work for the Gonski panel itself to consider. Another important area of work, making sure that teachers have the skills that they need to effectively engage students with a range of learning needs in the classroom. I cannot tell you what an eye-opener it has been to me as a minister to go into schools and see the diversity of approaches, but with a very high continuum of need, and really to come away with a huge amount of residual admiration for the efforts of teachers and teachers' aides, but importantly, the efforts of families, carers and the kids in those environments. And we do have some schools across systems who are doing some incredibly important things, but it is absolutely essential that teachers know how to approach best and most effective teaching in the classroom for kids with special needs and disabilities. As you know, we've delivered the first national professional standards for teachers, and of course you'd be aware that we always do make reference to the additional spend that we were able to generate from the last budget, some $200 million in new funding to support students with disabilities announced by the Prime Minister this year. That funding, as you know, to be delivered through a national partnership agreement that allows the states and territories and non-government authorities significant flexibility in how they apply the funding according to needs within their schools. And a range of activities contemplated: assistive technology, training for teachers, allied health services, speech therapy and the like. And here funding available through calendar years 2012 and 2013. And that takes me through to what I briefly mentioned a little earlier, the Australian Government's review of school funding chaired by David Gonski. This review to guide the way schools are funded from 2014 onwards. It's been 30 years since we had a proper look at how schools are funded in Australia. It's a long time. And it's clear that in many instances there is a mismatch between the job that we're asking schools to do and the resources we're giving them to actually do that task. And that's particularly true when we look at schools serving students with a range of additional learning needs, or students who bring significant disadvantage with them when they arrive at the school gate. Often schools are working with complex cases of mixed disadvantage. For example, the percentage of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander kids with a disability which is significantly higher than for other Australian students. And of course, a number of schools working with high concentration of students with such additional needs. I'll say it again and again, and I guess I'll keep on saying it until everyone gets sick of me saying it, and then I'll continue to say it, but this isn't an issue of government versus non-government schools. And the fact is there are schools right across our education system that are working hard to serve students and communities that have complex needs. And we need to make sure that those schools, regardless of sector, have the resources they need to do for the job that we're asking them to do. Now, I referred to the research that was commissioned by the panel last week, 4 pieces of work, and those reports are available on the DEWA website. The review panel is inviting submissions on the findings of those research reports, and several of them refer specifically to funding support for students with disabilities. Remember that in the terms of reference for the Gonski panel, they were specifically asked to look at this question. So I think this is a really important opportunity, and I do encourage everybody to engage with the funding review at this time, now those reviews are out in the public domain. So I'm glad I could come in for the end of your discussion. There is a lot on the policy agenda at the moment, and it's really important that your voices continue to be heard to help guide the work ahead. I do want to say that I don't want this to be a one-off dialogue, and I know that Catherine Wall has extended an invitation to you to continue to feed back, but I do feel very strongly that we need to build both a partnership and the interaction. And so I am announcing that we will establish a Schools Disability Advisory Committee, specifically to advise the Australian Government and me on the policy work that you've been discussing today and related matters. That committee to include representatives of people with disabilities and their families, school principals, teachers and specialist academics, and the department will provide more details about the advisory committee a bit further down the track after this forum. I do want to get that process started to continue a really genuine and fair income engagement in a period of significant reform, challenge but genuine opportunity. And that's especially for school-aged young people, their families and their carers, because the issues that matter in getting their education working are the ones that we really want to be able to focus on now. So thank you very much for your advocacy, the support roles that you're playing in your communities, for coming along with us today and continuing to work with us in the future. Thanks for having us.